Hello and welcome to Classics Confidential. Today we're filming on location in the cast gallery of Cambridge University. I'm delighted to welcome Clinical Associate Professor Peter Meineck. Let me just ask you, I was curious about the term clinical in your title. What does that mean?
Depends how political you want to get, right? I mean, it's, for me, a long time I was both equally a scholar and a practitioner. So for me it was a really great way to honour both of them. Clinical appointment comes from medical school originally, and it was really for doctors who were clinicians and also teaching. So for me it worked quite well. Now it's become a way of giving somebody a long-term contract without giving them tenure. So I'm not so sure that I necessarily would support the title, but it's worked for me. So I haven't been too unhappy with it. But so yeah, like all these titles and odd things that come into academia, it's I'm not that incredibly positive about it. But I do the same as any other professor at an American university, and now more scholarship than theatre, but I'm still involved in the theatre.
Now let me ask you, why do you think it's important to perform these ancient dramatic texts today?
That's a really good question, and I think that there's different reasons to do it. I think that sometimes just allowing people to see them as plays is a good enough reason. It's not why I do them. I think I do them because I think they often can convey an important message, which is what I want to say with them. And that's not necessarily everybody's view of them, but that's what I think drama is. I think, for me, there's no purpose in just, well, we're just going to do a Sophocles play. It's a great play. It's a great play because it's still radiating a message or something you want to say, or there's a performance in there, or there's some wonderful poetry, or there's something about it that means it has a reason to live and breathe. And of course, any new staging of a Greek play is a new play, right? So, the more I've learned about ancient drama, I think the more radical I've got with it. And that doesn't always sit well with classicists, who can often be, not all classicists, but some of them can be quite conservative about ancient drama. And of course, it's interesting, we were talking about this here yesterday in a seminar on the Cambridge Greek play, is, there's no unbroken tradition of ancient drama. We've re-established it as a kind of textual tradition, and we sort of put these plays back together academically, and they've never sat that well with the theatre community. It's not like Shakespeare, where there is an unbroken tradition. So they're always sort of interesting to do, because people have very strange ideas about ancient drama. So,
very true. What do you think of a trend in the reception of Greek tragedy in particular to sort of make political points, particularly I think in the last decades as sort of anti-war plays? I'm thinking in particular of Euripides' Trojan Women, for example.
I think if you look at the sort of multifaceted receptions of ancient drama, there's the university-based productions that were quite important and quite influential, particularly in America, actually. Think of the famous Harvard production, and then the first production of an Aristophanes play in America was a group of students from University of Pennsylvania, and this thing went to New York. It was Arcanians, actually, without any smut in it at all. Although one letter reported how the production caused a fluster because the boys in the show, like the 18-year-old students, had bare legs. And that was a real scandal at the time, so it's still Aristophanic. But I actually think, from an American perspective, Greek drama has always been political. So one of the earliest, if not the earliest, versions of a Greek play in America was a play based on the Jason and Medea story. It was a sort of series pantomime, and it was sort of based on a French original where they're playing around with this idea of narrative ballet. And this production was produced in a new theatre that was really set up to advance the sort of pro-French Jacobin view, anti-English view of the new America. And Greek drama was always getting used to sort of advance some kind of agenda and some kind of politics, which maybe is what gives its vitality. And then one of the first productions in New York was a production of Oedipus done at the Bowery Theatre, which was a real kind of rough and tumble, working class Irish Irish theatre anti-English. So you think, why were they doing Oedipus? We don't know anything about production. So I'm fascinated by the fact that, or Richard Schechner in doing Dionysus in 69 and 1968 as a political act, because the election's coming. So I think certainly from an American perspective, it's always been political. I'm not sure that's particularly true in England, although I do think there are artists here who do use it to sort of make political statements. So, but Greek drama is of the polis, right?
Yeah.
So, you know, it works.
Indeed. How important do you think is to try and retain some of the authentic features, for example, like in the Cambridge Greek play, to have ancient Greek, or having read your wonderful article in Orion about the function of the tragic mask, how important do you think it's to reproduce that kind of effect, or to try and reproduce that kind of effect?
Well, it depends who you're asking, right? If you're asking a scholar, then I think it is important to try and understand as much as we can about the original performance conditions, politics. So yes, it's very important. If you're asking the theatre director, it's not important at all. It would be the equivalent of sitting in this cast gallery, right? It would be a museum piece. But having said that, I think that the more theatre practitioners and directors are informed, the more knowledge they have of ancient drama, the more they're freed to having better ideas of it. So my sort of message is, if you're translating the Greek, you have to translate the staging. If you're not doing it in an open-air 5,000-seat theatre on the side of the Acropolis, and you're doing it in a enclosed space, you've already translated it. So to me, it's about meaning, right? So what's the objective of the play? What are you trying to say about it? You know, how can you make that play work in the environment you've got and the time you've got? So I do think it's useful to know as much as you can about these plays, because I think you can start seeing how they operated. But then I think you have to translate that for the stage. So I don't know if I've personally ever seen a kind of successful reconstruction. And then when you look back at this trend of reconstructions in the 19th century, they're almost laughable now, because of course the Greek theatre didn't look like that.
Yeah.
And maybe what we think it looked like now, in 50 years, people will laugh at what we're trying to do.
Probably.
So it's a little bit of a fool's errand. At the end of the day, if you're doing a play, you know, it exists in the here and now.
Yeah.
Now, it's a Greek play, so people are going to bring their cultural baggage to that performance, and you have to be aware of that. So I think if you do Greek drama right, it's always controversial.
Well, perhaps it should be, really.
Yeah. There's nothing wrong with that, right? You know, it's about dialogue and thought and difficult concepts and facing the unsaid and the unspoken. So, right, yeah.
I'm sure the ancient tragedians would have been happy if, you know, people leave the theatre, you know, thinking about things rather than just, you know, having watched something that's dull or boring, because then it doesn't work as a performance.
The worst word that anybody wants to hear from an audience member is "that was interesting." Then you failed completely. You either want someone to walk out disgust, or you want them to be compelled and absorbed. You really want them compelled and absorbed. We don't want to lose anybody, but you know, people saying that was interesting. I don't ever want to do interesting theatre. Maybe I have it sometimes, you know, but that's
not the aim.
No.
You also are now working on a new book which brings in cognitive theory and neuroscience. Can you tell us a little bit about this project?
Yeah, well, I was looking for a way to articulate the affect of theatre, and I felt that we'd reached a bit of a brick wall in reception theory, and now I'm talking about the reception of the original production, which has become quite unfashionable because there was a point where we found everything out now, and I feel that because ancient drama is really reconstructed from text, then a knowledge of material culture, sometimes we forget it as a live event. So I was trying to find a way to articulate what actors do, more importantly, how an audience receive a production. So the idea of how, and then I'm compelled by this question, again, which we're not really supposed to ask, but I want to ask it, which is why did Athenian drama, let's call it what it is, not even Greek drama, Athenian drama spread? What was it about it? And looking at the responses to it that we have from Plato and Aristotle and Socrates, they all said it has the power to move the soul. So this was something where I thought, well, And my interest in cognition and neuroscience came about in trying to prove that the mask can change its expression and why that's happening. And so I started to sort of engage with face recognition studies and started to sort of move into these areas. And then I spent about 3 or 4 years really studying clinical neuroscience. I'm not a neuroscientist, cognitive theory. And I think my first year I was kind of, wow. And then I got more cynical about it. And then I needed to really kind of, I spent a lot of time in watching experiments in brain imaging labs and figuring out all the different, and of course it's in a huge field. But I'm very interested in the clinical side of neuroscience and the area of cultural neuroscience. And neuroscience is in its infancy, particularly brain imaging. But it's getting to the point now where some of the conclusions are deeply in humanities territory. So if nothing else, I think those of us that work in the humanities have something to contribute to these studies. And I think cultural neuroscience is now showing us that different cultures think differently. And as classicists, we're expert at studying a culture that's gone.
Yeah.
And we're already kind of doing cognition. We're thinking about how they think and the attitudes and politics. And so I actually think that the two combine quite nicely. And for me, it's not about being deterministic at all. I mean, I take a biocultural stance, which is that, you know, we all share the same biology. We share exactly the same biology with the ancient Greeks. Now, our epigenetics, right, are different. Our culture's different. But if we can say that the biology is 50% similar, then that's 50% that I know about the ancient Greeks, which is maybe more than I know as a classicist. And as a theatre practitioner, you're very interested in emotions, in the central nervous system, in making people sweat, making people have lumps in their throat, making their hair stand up on the back of their neck. As Gorgias says, making them shudder in fear. So the affective sciences, I think, is a really great tool for thinking about responses to art. And for me, it gives me, maybe it creates a distance and allows me to think a bit deeper about these questions. And maybe my conclusions I may have come up with using more traditional theories, but it's really helped me think about how ancient drama works.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And I mean, classical reception, one of the points is to truly engage with other disciplines. It's just that you've gone sort of beyond the humanities circle, and I think it's very exciting.
But I think neuroscience is a humanity because they're studying humans. So, and I say this to neuroscientists all the time, and so for us to feel that we don't have anything to contribute is wrong, I think, and I think neuroscientists would, the enlightened ones, want to work with us.
Yeah,
we don't speak the same language, we don't pursue things in the same way, but there is a common area, and I'm interested in that commonality.
And I think Plato's point about the danger and the power of theatre, I think, is now sort of being proved by science.
That's
which
right.
is very exciting.
Yeah, and in a way that was the experiment Aristotle was doing in Poetics. He was taking a scientific view of drama, and I think we forget that sometimes. And and Plato's wrong. Plato and Aristotle are wrong sometimes. I mean, Aristotle thought the brain was a radiator that cooled the body. Right? So, we have to take it all with a pinch of salt. But it's interesting that they too are thinking cognitively about the effect of aesthetics and art, and it's a great way to kind of renew the aesthetic argument about Greek art. So, for me, it's exciting. So.
No, it sounds fascinating. We look forward to your book on it. There's also, of course, the other side that Greek drama can be of therapeutic value. Yeah. And Nancy Rabinovitz has already told me a little bit about your project. Yeah. Would you like to tell us more? Yeah,
I mean, I completely agree that ancient drama, if it didn't start off as therapy, it became a kind of cultural therapy, and that's not, I'm not the only person who thinks that, and we see this with the location of Sanctuaries of Asclepius always happening after about 420, next to theatres, and just responses to it. Again, I think we tend to divide off medicine from therapy, from theatre, from politics. I don't think the Greeks did. I think these are all kind of the same thing. And the early kind of theatrical traditions of the Komos, the parade, the symposium, were all, in a way, therapies. I think sometimes just sitting in an audience with other people is in itself a therapy. Certainly, a program that Nancy was one of our scholars called Ancient Greeks Modern Lives. We got a large amount of funding from the federal government to take actors out to 100 sites all over America, doing readings of ancient drama to veterans and members, combat veterans and members of the public. And we found that combat veterans responded to the themes of ancient drama. I think because they were quite surprised of the truthfulness of characters like Philoctetes or Ajax or even Agamemnon to situations that they themselves found a commonality with. And I think that because these things were classics, they felt this validated perhaps their own experiences, and this created a dialogue. It created, people would start speaking and telling us their stories. And certainly for Americans, who are generally illiterate about war, it felt very important to just have a conversation about what is war, what's the cost of war, what's the reality. And of course combat veterans are incredible because they've experienced it, they're the eyewitnesses, and I've never met a combat veteran who's pro-war. Doesn't mean they're not proud of their service, but they've many of them, and there's no one response, right, but many of them have never told these stories. So I think that's the great value, and I've learned an enormous amount about these plays from the response of combat veterans to them. Jonathan Shea famously said, who's the psychologist that wrote Achilles in Vietnam and Odysseus in America, he said the Greek drama was theatre written by combat veterans, performed by combat veterans, for combat veterans. So I think there's almost like a purity of experience on a one-to-one level. Yeah. And so this program's been very successful. We even did it at the White House, which was remarkable. And it's continuing now. It's now called U Stories, and we're doing a kind of app version of it where we're developing an app. But it's remarkable to see ancient drama kind of still working on a therapeutic level. And I think artists are not necessarily therapists, but art can be therapy. We even took it to Athens, actually, and it was so fascinating to do this quite radical version of Heracles with a chorus made up of films of combat veterans. And it was very interesting to then sit with an Athenian audience and to have them see the impact that their culture has on these people from another culture. It's really a fascinating project.
Because of course, I mean, the 5th century was a very turbulent century, right. Full of wars, starting with the Persian wars, followed of course by the Peloponnesian wars. So I mean, the ancient Athenians, 5th century BC Athenians, to be precise, knew all about war. And as Thucydides said, only the young get really excited about the idea of war because they haven't really experienced it.
And I think this goes all the way back to Homer. I mean, I think the Iliad is about, this is what war's like, right? I mean, it's sort of, how do you find your sanity? How do you keep the sense of yourself with all this destruction around you happening? And I think that that's very powerful. So, yeah, it's been a really great project, and we've hired about 50 classics professors and sent them off into public libraries, and this real idea of kind of applied classics. At a time we're being told that classics is irrelevant. It really isn't. I mean, it really has very deep meaning and in a very real way, and exists in its own right. And these are great stories. That's why they're classics, and they still work. So in a way, this has been one of the most sort of effective applications I've sort of been involved in of classical material, and it's not the only one. So yeah, it's good.
Fantastic. How does all of the performative aspects, if you like, impact on your work as a translator of the dramatic texts?
Well, all of my translations are written for the stage, and they go through a process of me translating the Greek, which is sometimes going to the papyrus. I mean, it's a long process, any translator knows. But what's produced from that is not the final thing. Then it goes to the actors. It goes into the rehearsal process, and it goes through this additional step. And maybe that sometimes moves it away from being a useful crib in a classroom, but hopefully gives it a sort of velocity. So I felt my contribution to the translation market is translations that can be performed on stage, that don't suffer from translationese. And you know, there's incredible translations out there of works that I've done. I don't think mine are better than anybody else's. I just think they're a bit different. I want to tackle now Menander, because I don't like Menander, and I think that's my deficiency. I think Menander was probably superb, hilarious situation comedy, and I think the key to Menander lies in performance. So, and I don't think that's really quite happened yet. Certainly Menander has never kind of gone into the professional theatre world. I mean, he does Menander. And yet, probably the best translation of a Menander play is The Importance of Being Earnest by Oscar Wilde. So, right, so there is a kind of blueprint for it. So that's my challenge, which is to sort of tackle my big bear in the room, which is Menander. And I'd like when I finish this particular project, I'd like to give that a shot and try and do one as well. Can I do it? Can I make a funny Menander play? That's the challenge.
Well, good luck with that.
Exactly. But there's something going on there, and I think text alone won't solve it. I think it needs to be on stage.
Well, I think often we make sort of pronouncements about, oh, this play doesn't work or that play doesn't work, and then when you see it perform, it actually works perfectly well. Yeah. So
people thought that for many years about Ajax. It's a broken play, and after Ajax commits suicide, and in performance, it is incredible after he commits suicide. The tension, it's a superb play. So yeah, I mean, you have to get them up on their feet, and you know. And maybe something that worked in antiquity in that environment isn't necessarily going to work today, or a play that worked in 1950 isn't necessarily going to work now. We definitely go through fashions of Greek plays as well, which is good because it keeps the whole thing
alive. Yeah.
Hey, and maybe we'll discover some more, right?
Yeah. Well, there's always hope. There's always hope. Excellent. Well, on that hopeful note, it's been wonderful talking to you, Peter, and very best with all your projects.
Thank you.